All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever really looked at a world map and wondered how we got all those lines, all those borders? Well, today we're going to dive deep into the world of political geography and break down the absolute essentials.
Okay, let's start with a kind of mind-blowing idea. Picture yourself as an astronaut, right? You're floating in space, looking down at our beautiful planet. You see the continents, the oceans, the clouds, but you know what you don't see? Not a single country. Not one. Because all those lines, all those borders on our maps, they're completely made up by us humans. They're totally invisible from up there. But down here, they shape just about everything. So that begs the question, right? How did we end up with this massive, complicated patchwork of countries all over the globe? And for that matter, what even is a country really? Let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle the big one. What even is a state? Then we'll look at their size, and you'll see just how extreme the differences can be. After that, we'll explore why we have so many states today. And finally, we'll take a look at how these states are actually governed.
All right, first things first, we have to get a solid handle on the most fundamental building block of the entire world map.
Okay, here is probably the most important vocabulary word for this whole topic: state. Now, I know what you're thinking, like California or Texas, right? Nope. In AP Human Geography, when we say state, we actually mean country. It seems like a small thing, but trust me, getting this distinction down is absolutely crucial.
So from here on out, whenever you hear the word state in this context, I want you to picture France or Brazil or Japan, not Florida or Ohio. Think of the 50 US states as subdivisions, pieces of a bigger puzzle that make up one single country, the United States of America. And what's the magic ingredient that makes a state a state? It's this word right here: sovereignty. Sovereignty is everything. It's the independence a state has from being controlled by any other state. It means they have the final say over what happens inside their own borders. They're the boss.
Okay, so now that we know what a state is, let's talk about how big they are. And, well, get ready for this, because the difference between the biggest and the smallest countries on Earth is it's truly mind-boggling.
So on one end of the spectrum, you have the absolute giant, Russia. We're talking 17.1 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, this one single country covers a whopping 11% of the world's entire land area. That is huge. Now, let's go to the complete other end of that spectrum. I love this analogy because it just nails the scale perfectly. If Russia were the size of a single page in your notebook, a microstate would be the size of just one letter on that page. Think about that for a second.
So what are these tiny little letters on the page? They're called microstates, and they are exactly what they sound like: states with incredibly small land areas. The Vatican, for example, is the smallest in the world. But there are about 24 of these little guys, and a lot of them, you'll notice, are islands. All right, let's switch gears a bit. One of the most important things to understand about the modern world map is just how new a lot of it is. The number of countries has absolutely exploded. I mean, check this out. As recently as the 1940s, so around the time your grandparents were born, there were only about 50 countries in the entire world. Today, we're pushing 200. That's a huge increase. So what happened? Where did all these new states come from? Well, a great way to track this explosion of countries is to look at the growth in United Nations membership over time. You can see these three major waves, these big surges of new countries joining. The first was right after World War II in Europe. The second, a huge one, was in the 1960s as former colonies in Africa gained independence. And the most recent wave came in the early 90s with the breakup of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. Each one of these moments totally redrew the world map. And that brings us to the UN itself. It's not a perfect system, not by a long shot, but it plays an absolutely vital role. It gives pretty much every state on Earth a place to meet, to talk, to vote on big issues, hopefully without having to go to war. Okay, so we've established what a state is and how we got so many of them. For our last big topic, let's look inside a state. How are they actually governed? How is power distributed? Yeah, when you boil it all down, it really comes down to this fundamental question. Who holds the power? Does a strong central government make all the big decisions, or do smaller, more local governments get to call the shots in their own regions? The answer really defines how a state is organized. And this leads to two main models. On one hand, you have a unitary state. Think of a country like France, where most of the power is concentrated in the hands of the central government in Paris. On the other hand, you have a federal state, like the United States or Russia, where power is deliberately shared and divided between the national government and local units, like states or provinces. And here's a perfect example of that federal idea in action. This is the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It essentially says that any power that isn't specifically given to the federal government, well, that power is reserved for the states. This single sentence is the bedrock of the American federal system.
So, which way is the world leaning? Well, there's actually a pretty strong global trend toward federal governments. And why is that? A lot of the time, it's a way to handle diversity. It allows different ethnic groups within a country to have more self-determination and local control over their own territory, which can go a long way in satisfying people and keeping a country together.
So let's wrap up with this final thought. It kind of feels like the world map is set in stone, right? Like all the land has been divvied up. But political geography is never static. It's always changing. So the question for you is, with pretty much all of Earth's land already part of some state, where could the next new states possibly come from? It's a really interesting question to chew on as we keep exploring this topic.